Story 1. I worked in retail before joining the military. Let's just say I would not be able to handle difficult customers without verbally guiding them back to their unique perspectives. My wife agrees. Story 2. Bartending was a TGI Friday cocktail bartender among other venues. It was fun back in the day, but no thank you. Story 3. Teaching was a challenge for me. I taught preschool, and it wasn't the children who made me quit. It was the entitled parents who expected me to parent their kids and became upset when I stepped in. The management also contributed to my decision. My vacation requests were consistently denied, while other teachers were allowed time off and could leave early. Although I couldn't prove it, I often felt that comments were made to me regarding my being single and not having a family to go home to. One time, my director yelled at me while I was physically ill and throwing up in a trash can on the playground. She said if I had informed her of my condition, she wouldn't have allowed another teacher, whose anniversary with her husband was that day, to go home. She looked me straight in the eye as I left and said, "Now we're in trouble because of you." Shortly after that incident, I decided to quit, vowing never to return. No amount of money could convince me otherwise. Story 4. Anything customer-related. You will never meet a more annoying group than an older person confused about why the expired coupon won't work, or a delinquent teenager trying to be funny while bothering everyone. Story 5. I worked as a maintenance mechanic at a 40-lane bowling alley. Our team consisted of 2 members for the day, but we only had 4 lockout/tagout boxes available, which we never used. There wasn't enough time in the day to operate in compliance with occupational safety and health administration standards. Each pin setter was an approximately 8-foot-tall machine, and there were 40 of them, each with its own breaker box. I had to lean over the machine to turn it on or off and reach inside the intricate components, hoping the electronics wouldn't fail while the front desk activated the machine or a customer repeatedly pressed the ball return. Often, I found myself lying on my stomach underneath the machine on the lane, hoping the bowler next to me wouldn't accidentally send the ball to my lane. Climbing 8 feet and then walking an 18-inch platform across all 40 machines was dangerous, as there were no railings. A fall could mean dropping 8 feet to the ground or falling into the machine. I also had to go down on my belly to scrub the pin pit, pulling pins while people bowled to clean them with a towel, as the lane oil damaged the machines. That meant handling 10 to 11 pins for each of the 40 machines. I had to sweep all 80 gutters down to the pins and back twice a day. I lost 30 pounds in my first month. I had to buy new pants within that month because of how much weight I lost. This was the only job I ever had where the work truly felt like work. I left every day drenched in sweat and covered in oil. While I never got injured, my coworker broke his ankle on the pin setter. Story 6. I tried fast food for a week and decided I would rather work midnights at the airport than get yelled at by people every day. Story 7. When I was 21 years old, I worked in a place that made deviled crabs. They contained less than 1% crab meat and used low-quality scrap fish. The fish would be boiled and then strained, but much water remained, so I had to squeeze it out by hand, which was extremely unpleasant and smelled horrible. Imagine coming in at 6 a.m. with a terrible hangover. I will never work with food again. Story 8. U.S. Department of Commerce, Census Bureau. People screaming at you, threatening to shoot you, and sharing various conspiracy theories about the government, along with incredibly racist and inaccurate information about their neighbors, was overwhelming. I also discovered that many physical maps and mapping applications are grossly inaccurate, making it difficult to locate specific houses. When I finished, they asked if I wanted to be a manager during the next round. I thanked them politely and signed up for substitute teaching, as dealing with children was easier to manage. Story 9. Nursing in the hospital wards. I am still a nurse but now have a work-from-home job. I used to love the wards and feel nostalgic thinking about them, but conditions have worsened. There is understaffing, increased responsibilities, constant blame, and more paperwork every day. Story 10. I finally got a public-facing job that does not require working directly or indirectly with customers, and it feels like a relief. Story 11. Build cutting dies for the corrugated industry. Some owners paid below minimum wage if they could get away with it. I hope someone who works at Triangle Dyes in Batavia Illinois reads this. J.C. Marovich and his family can go away. Story 12. Management of any kind can be terrible. You might as well wear a sign that says punching bag. Everything seemed to be my fault regarding the actions of team members, whether I was present or not. There were phone calls outside of working hours and nonstop emails. Customers were abusive, threatening me over company policies. It was a nightmare. Story 13. Casino dealer. The hours from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. are terrible, and the pay is disappointing at around $40 per hour. It's disheartening to see people come in, gamble their money, and then become upset when they have to eat beans on toast for the next 2 weeks until their pension arrives, only to return and spend $500 in 30 minutes. Story 14. Carl's Jr. I was a new employee and was harassed by another employee on my first day of orientation. Shortly after, I decided this was not the job for me. Story 15. I used to be a cocktail waitress, and although I made great money, I don't think I could ever do it again. Story 16. Working at my local cinema is challenging. I feel severely underpaid, and customers can be rude, entitled, and noisy. Additionally, there is always a mess to clean up. Story 17. Field engineer in information technology. The job can be thankless and is often soul-destroying and physically exhausting. Getting yourself, your toolkit, and the necessary spare parts to a 12-story office in the middle of a pedestrianized area of a city center, with the nearest parking facility half a mile away, is a challenge. They often log the wrong model, but when you can't fix it due to having the wrong parts, it becomes your fault. Doing this multiple times a day, often handling 10 to 12 calls, each taking at least an hour or more, adds to the difficulty. Story 18. I worked as a waitress in a budget casino for one 8-hour shift. I had unpleasant customers making inappropriate gestures and sending unwanted kisses. It was awful. Story 19. Anything that involves working directly with the public. I have worked in a couple of grocery stores and in fast food. Never again. Story 20. McDonald's can be a challenging work environment. It's frustrating to deal with demanding customers and an overworked manager. I really felt I needed a break after that experience. Story 21. Anything related to restaurants and building materials or construction. Years of verifiable experience and success in both areas. Story 22. Sales is an essential aspect of many jobs. However, primarily working on commission can be exhausting and detrimental to your mental health. Story 23. I will never be a manager in any capacity. I am much better as a regular worker. Just give me a task, and I will complete it quietly and efficiently. Story 24. Picking and packing in a warehouse. Having to scan out to go to the restroom. Managed 1.5 shifts and walked out halfway through. Story 25. I was the head counselor at a summer day camp. The issue was entirely my boss. I quit after my boss told a homesick 5-year-old that if she let him call his parents, they would rush to come get him because they would be worried, and then they would get into a car accident and die, leaving him without parents and missing them for the rest of his life instead of just 5 more hours. She didn't want to inform payroll that I had quit, so she asked me to give her, in cash, any money that payroll was sending me for the remainder of the summer. That wasn't the only thing she did, but the rest makes me angry to think about. Story 26. Customer support. I'm not meant to interact with individuals who fail to read documentation, are unable to describe their issues clearly, yet lack the courtesy to express gratitude or treat others with respect. Story 27. An oil change technician at a service station. Hearing the boss shout at us that every oil change leaving the shop without an upsell costs him money is demoralizing. Story 28. Any type of retail. I have spent over a third of my working years in retail. I was treated poorly by both management and customers. Story 29. Clearing ditches lasted one day. My brief flirtation with dropping out of college ended that day. Story 30. Truck wash. I worked at a Blue Beacon in high school. We used to wash the exterior of cattle trucks. There was a slaughterhouse in town, and we had to remove a significant amount of blood from the refrigerated trucks for them. 2 employees would go to the back and then wash everything forward. leaving each truck looking like a scene from a horror movie. Story 31. I work on the front line at a hospital. Many screeners were working for very low wages or for temporary agencies. They were dedicated individuals, listening to people's political views and claims about COVID being fake all day long. The worst were those who refused to have their temperature taken. Our hospital used thermometers that were accurate on the forehead. Some individuals would hold their wrist up to the screener, thinking it was smart or funny to defy the rules, while there were 20 people in line, many of them sick or injured. I'm sure that most of the door screeners were not there because they wanted to be, but because they needed to be. I know tensions were high at that time, but a little kindness goes a long way. Story 32. We owned a couple of gyms for years and were highly successful because we worked extremely hard. We sold the gyms after I was diagnosed with cancer and could not work physically. Life is much calmer now, and I can honestly say I would never want to own a business again. Story 33. Where I draw the line is handling elderly individuals. Not that I have experience, but I would do anything except that. Story 34. Working at any Wegmans may not be the same at all of their stores, but the one I worked at had the most toxic people I have ever encountered. Story 35. Door-to-door financial services sales aim to build a substantial portfolio of clients to establish an office for operations. During training, I learned that one individual entered an office with $40 million in assets under management already. The company's name could possibly be something like EJ. Story 36. Telemarketing lasted one day, though I'm not sure telemarketing exists in quite the same way anymore. Story 37. Door-to-door canvasser. I participated in a campaign that I strongly supported, but that type of work was so out of my comfort zone that I don't think I could do it again. Story 38. Tech support was very stressful. Users were sometimes a nightmare, and most of my supervisors were not very good at their jobs. Payment was inadequate, and I used to work from Monday to Saturday. It was the worst year of my life. Story 39. I have worked in various food service jobs before moving to another industry. Working in the Safeway deli was the hardest job I have ever had, and I have worked in labor since then. Story 40. Customer retention specialist for TrueGreen. What a nightmare. In a nutshell, I was told to lie to customers to keep them. I lasted through the first month, which included 3 weeks of training. Sorry, but TrueGreen, your lawn service is not acceptable. Story 41. I once had a temporary job in a mailroom, opening letters with Nutrimetics vouchers in them. The letters had been sliced at the top by a machine, and I had to use my thumb to open them. It lasted a week before my joints seized up, so I quit. It was quite dull as well. Story 42. Standing in front of a Liberty Tax Service office, wearing a Statue of Liberty outfit and carrying a sign for the service. Story 43. Insurance sales was the worst job I ever had in my life, and the agent I worked for was extremely unpleasant. Story 44. Package handler for FedEx. I wouldn't wish that on anyone. I made good money, especially during the holidays. Story 45. Doggy daycare. Managing a dozen dogs in a yard alone can be challenging, especially when you constantly deal with being jumped on or worrying about breaking up fights. You are not compensated adequately for handling dog fights. Story 46. Credit card service call center. I worked in applications and experienced anxiety that sent me to the emergency room because I thought I was having a heart attack. Felt like I was helping push people into debt, and it hurt my soul. Story 47. Scare actor. I spent a season in a very busy, popular haunt with 4 houses and honestly had a blast portraying different characters. However, I experienced harassment many times. There was security, but they were understaffed and couldn't be everywhere when needed. They did their best, but it was exhausting to deal with. Story 48. Taking calls from customers. I worked for a mortgage company where the customer service department kept directing their calls into my department's queue. I received 99 calls in 1 week. My own department kept turning off their phones because they felt they couldn't get any work done. If the only job I could find involved being yelled at all day, it would be unbearable. Story 49. As most people are saying, I have had many full-time customer service jobs during my 9 years in the industry. My current position is primarily focused on a mix of customer service and engineering work, with roughly 70% of my responsibilities in customer service as a safety engineer at an aerospace company. Customer service skills are valuable for understanding the key individuals needed to implement changes. However, there is often an inclination to attribute issues to safety, even when they are not related to it. Story 50. Private investigator. There was too much lying. For years afterward, I had trust issues with almost everyone. Story 51. Stock shelves. My first job was as a truck unloader for Target part-time, making $8.50 per hour. I used to wake up at 3 a.m. to start my shift at 4 a.m. and unload 1,400 piece trucks, sort the items onto pallets, wheel them out to the floor, and put products on shelves. Never again. I would rather take a tool to my kneecaps than do that work again. That's a young person's job. I'm suited for desks, air-conditioned office buildings, standard hours, weekends, and emails these days. Story 52. The plumbing warehouse shop employee thought he would be able to create an organized system. However, much of the job involves others making a mess and not caring, knowing there is someone to clean it up. Story 53. Sell wheelchair vans. Mobility Works takes advantage of handicapped individuals and military veterans. Not only do they deceive people out of their money for subpar vans, but they also exploit their disabilities. I have never felt more horrified as a human being. Story 54. Plastic mold car part factory. I worked there for 8 weeks one summer because it offered full-time hours and I needed the money for university. It was very boring. The pay wasn't even good. Story 55. Digging ditches was my introduction to a full career in construction as a young 19-year-old. I have just retired as a contractor after 48 years. Story 56. Standing at the end of a machine peeling plastic off bottles and turning around to stack them on a pallet for 8 hours with only a 30-minute break is exhausting. Story 57. I'm still working but focusing on my culinary skills. I have completed 55 hours with 2 more days to go and am about to finish a dissertation for my career. Let's go. Story 58. Growing up, my uncle had a poultry farm. I shoveled more chicken waste than you could ever imagine. I guarantee you that's one job I will never do again. Story 59. Teaching is challenging, and it is not just the children. There are many parents who lack understanding of effective parenting, along with unsupportive administrators. Story 60. Being a salesperson set up in a booth at a parking lot requires complimenting people to get their attention so you can pitch what your company is marketing and why they should sign up and donate on a monthly basis. I remember avoiding booths with salespeople, and now being one of them, I completely understand why people avoid us. After 1 week working that job in Arizona's 110-degree weather, I decided to move on. Story 61. Fast food. I worked in other customer-facing hourly jobs that were less stressful and frustrating, and I would gladly do them again. I suspect it would have been easier if I hadn't only been assigned closing shifts back then, but people truly treat you as if you are less than in those roles. Story 62. Factory piecework. 2 weeks of doing the same task every 5 seconds for 8 hours a day made me wish for an early end. Story 63. Robot interventionists 99% of the time want you to splash water on them. 1% of the time they get splashed and want you to finish the job now. Story 64. Any job where my coworkers at the same level scream at me every day and make me feel less worthy as a person or worker is unacceptable. I can tolerate criticism from equal-level coworkers, but not yelling or insults. I am okay with criticism from a superior, but not from someone at my level. Story 65. Cold calling for sales can be emotionally challenging. It can shake your confidence even when there is no phone in hand, leaving you feeling neglected or fearing neglect from friends and relatives, and questioning your self-worth. Story 66. Dishwasher or any retail job. There's a reason I'm going to college, so that I don't have to work in those places ever again. Story 67. Landscaping. I did a lot of landscaping at my house while growing up. I often got in trouble, and my punishment was yard work or my siblings' chores. I also did landscaping as a job during my teenage years. I can handle the sweat and heat since I have been working in solar, electrical, and construction for 10 years, but I dislike being sweaty and covered in dirt. Story 68. Anything related to restaurants that is direct to consumer. Owning a restaurant, serving, management, cashier, hostess, busser, preparation, stocking, no. Story 69. I worked for a timeshare company in the late 1990s for 1.5 days. I had to cold call people and tell them they won a free trip to Orlando, then entice them into a presentation. It was terrible. I walked out. Story 70. Chef or pastry chef so underpaid. Earning around $20 for 50 hours of work each week while managing 4 people is unreasonable. Plus, the skills required and the ability to juggle everything are significant challenges. Story 71. Wildland fire was an exhausting job. I am proud to have done it and to have met some of the most incredible people I will ever know. However, I quickly realized that I wasn't built for this type of work. Story 72. Retail for sure. People are too comfortable complaining about being out of things because they are used to Amazon having everything. Digging ditches for plumbers was a tough job. I was strong but felt scrawny afterward. It always felt like I was working hard, but the pay was poor. Granted, I was in high school and college at the time, and minimum wage was lower than it is today. I think I made $6.25 an hour. I was tan and fit, but I never had the time or energy to spend the money. Story 73. I worked at a plant nursery over the summer after my freshman year of high school. It was backbreaking work in brutal heat and paid very little. I learned some things, but I would never pursue that line of work again. Story 74. Driving a semi-truck involves long hours, averaging 11 hours a day. Being away from home for months, I did not earn even $5 an hour for my time on the road. Story 75. Retail is not for me. I prefer to avoid any job where coworkers boast about being former felons or current criminals or drug users. If you find yourself in such a situation, it is important to leave quickly. Story 76. Warehousing, up at dawn. Working hard and expected to work harder and faster. Story 77. I was young and desperate, so I took a job at Long John Silver's. I went home every day smelling like fish and coleslaw. My skin and hair felt greasy. I think the air in that place was greasy too. The floors were incredibly slick. Then I briefly worked for Southwestern Bell, calling elderly individuals and single mothers to inform them that if they didn't pay their bill by noon tomorrow, their phone service would be cut off. That job drained my spirit. Both of those experiences are huge never agains. Story 78. I just saw someone mention being a package handler for FedEx. That was the worst job ever. I quit after 2 weeks because they put me in a trailer by myself as a new hire, which they weren't supposed to do. I got trapped in there during the Christmas season, and the boxes wouldn't stop coming down the chute. Then, a large Blackstone griddle came tumbling down and fell on me, bruising my leg. I experienced terrible panic attacks and suicidal thoughts because of that job. It was the first and only time I quit a job without giving 2 weeks' notice and without having a backup job. Story 79. Retail. Decades ago, I worked at New York & Company. I worked a total of 6 days in 6 months just to get a discount. My first paycheck was $21 after tax. My clothing bill came to over $300. Talk about defeating my purpose. I couldn't wear sneakers or chew gum. They wanted me to clean the floor, but I refused. A manager had the nerve to tell me that they took turns cleaning the bathroom. Well, you go right ahead. I was there because I wanted to be, not because I needed to be. I work for a law firm in finance. People clean my bathroom. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.